Now let's cross next to Makram Rabah. He's in Beirut as well. He lectures in history at the American University there. Makram, considering recent developments and rhetoric from both sides, how severe do you expect Israel's announced strikes to be?
Well, it is clear that the Israelis are trying to push the envelope by forcing Hezbollah to announce its defeat in a way. It has systematically started to bomb on a larger scale many of the villages which extend beyond the so-called border villages with Palestine. And this is why, technically, I think that the so-called exodus of the inhabitants of South Lebanon will remind everyone what is at stake. And I think that Hezbollah, given what had happened with it in the last 2 days, particularly the killing of one of its highest senior military commanders, or what happened with the pager attack, I think that now is the right time for Hezbollah to ask for help. However, this is my personal belief, that Hezbollah does not understand the gravity of the situation. They still believe that the international community will put an end to the Israeli attack, while at the same time, simply they're hoping to, as we say, run out the clock. All of these scenarios are basically very tragic for anyone involved in the conflict.
Now, the other side of the border, Israel has told its citizens to brace for intensifying strikes from Hezbollah after the pager attacks, which targeted its top commanders. What is Hezbollah still capable of?
Well, Hezbollah is definitely capable of driving the inhabitants of the northern cities of Israel down to the shelters. However, ironically here, you see that these people have shelters and have the ability to mobilize the healthcare system, whereas you look at Lebanon and you look at Hezbollah that claims that is capable of protecting Lebanon, and particularly the Shiites of the south, we see that civilians are fleeing their homes and they don't have homes to go to. Most of these people will either sleep on the streets or basically look for shelter with their relatives. Ultimately, I think that the people of the north of Syria are bracing themselves for a kind of an escalation of violence. However, in the case of Lebanon, the total collapse of the country, be it because of the war or because of the economic situation, makes the potential idea of an elongated or prolonged war a very tragic and very devastating on the people's psychological mindset as well as their physical well-being.
Now, these pager attacks have injured thousands, including civilians. Has that boosted support for Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, I wouldn't call it support. Many of the people who showed empathy or unity with some of these civilians that were injured did so because at the end of the day, these are fellow Lebanese. This doesn't really cross into supporting Hezbollah's Iranian war. At the end of the day, I personally felt empathy and did support and was willing to show empathy to people who were hurt, but in no way I'm willing to adopt the rhetoric of Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah, who sees that the only way forward is more destruction and more violence. And certainly the people of Lebanon don't want to throw Israel into the sea. We just want peace. We want the war in Gaza to end. Yet at the same time, we don't see that the continuing of the fighting in Lebanon, as Nasrallah and Hezbollah are promoting, is actually beneficial for the Palestinians nor for the people of Lebanon.
Now, talking about the people of Lebanon, what role is the Lebanese government playing in all this? Couldn't they de-escalate?
Well, the Lebanese government, contrary to the government we had in 2006, has no legitimacy whatsoever. First of all, it's a caretaker government, not to mention that we don't have a president. This vacancy in the presidency is basically one of the deadly sins of Hezbollah and its allies. Not to mention that at the end of the day, the Miqati government, Prime Minister Najib Miqati, is simply a kind of a puppet. And much of the rhetoric he's saying, he acts as if he's a sovereign prime minister. Yet at the end of the day, the decision for war and peace comes from Iran and doesn't even come from Hezbollah. So all of this has discredited Miqati and in a way has isolated Lebanon's political elite and made them a kind of a pariah. This is why now we have many regional as well as foreign actors trying to rush to Beirut to try to impose a kind of a ceasefire or potential reinstating of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Yet at the same time, we don't have a credible government to actually see these ideas through.
Now, the anniversary of the October 7th terror attacks by Hamas is coming close. What effect does that have on the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah? Does it have any?
Well, I think this is an earnest reminder that despite the war might be coming to an end, or despite that Gaza has become somewhat thing of the past, we have entered a new phase of conflict, which is more devastating. Even the Israeli media is referring to what's happening in Lebanon as the third war, which means that we are entering a new phase in the conflict. The only difference is that previously in 2006, the majority of the Lebanese, including myself, bet on the idea that Nasrallah and Hezbollah will act Lebanese, and they have failed miserably in this. At the moment, there's no real betting on Nasrallah's Lebanese interests, and this is why ultimately I think what the Israelis are trying to do, other than bring back the inhabitants of the south back to their villages, they're trying to drag Iran into war, which doesn't bode well for the entire region and for global security and stability.
Why do you say that? Why would it be in Israel's interest to drag Iran into a war?
Because ultimately this idea that Israel is fighting Hezbollah is absurd. Hezbollah is one proxy in a series of proxies. You see that the Houthis have tried to join in, the Iraqis are trying to join in, not to mention that Syria is also actively, indirectly, by trying to encircle Israel. The Israeli military and intelligence apparatus know that there is a challenge to be addressed, whereas a direct challenge is Hezbollah. At the end of the day, the problem of the region rests in Tehran, not in the proxies which occupy many of these nations, including my own country. So I believe ultimately Netanyahu will try to do this on the pulpit of the United Nations General Assembly, remind everyone that the Obama doctrine and the whole so-called democratic, the democratic administration's insistence that Iran can be a source of stability has failed miserably, and this is why one has to go back either to conflict or a way of imposing sanctions. This would work.
Makram Rabah there from the American University of Beirut. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.